My name is John Isaacs, Senior Fellow with Council for Livable World. With me this morning is Senator Chris Van Hollen, Senator from Maryland, who actually worked for Republican Senator Mac Mathias a number of years ago and also worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and now is a member of, among other things, the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator, let's start. This is the day for the March for Science. Why is the March for Science important to you?
Well, first, let me say, John, it's great to be with you this morning. Thank you for the great work you and the Council for a Livable World have done for so many decades, trying to bring rationality to the public policy debate and trying to build a more peaceful world. And if you look at what we're marching for today at its core, we're talking about marching for human progress and investments that we know have made our country very strong and great. At its root, science is about looking at the universe, getting together the facts, discovering things, and translating those discoveries into ways to help people, whether it's the development of new treatments and cures to diseases, whether it's new technologies to help us have better lives. These are all things that are important to us as human beings, and the United States has been stronger and a world power in large part because we recognize that we need to make those investments together. So I'm here because the Trump administration is talking about turning back the clock on that progress, and part of their approach has been to cut our investment in science. This is a White House that unfortunately believes in alternative facts, not real facts.
As you know, the Council for Livable World has been focused in its history on nuclear weapons. What has been the role of science in nuclear weapons development and then nuclear weapons arms control?
Well, as we know, scientists, through their great work, develop new technologies. Those technologies can be used for good purposes. They can be used for harmful purposes. It's all up to the rest of us through our democratic process here in the United States, to try to make sure that we use technologies for advancing our society. So obviously, nuclear physicists were very instrumental in developing the nuclear bomb. I mean, if you go back to Albert Einstein with E equals mc squared, that was the formula. But it's important to know that it was primarily scientists who raised the alarm about the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. Einstein being among them. Oppenheimer, who of course was charged with the Manhattan Project, was one of the people who then worked very hard to make sure that we would never see nuclear weapons used, because they recognized the destructive power of these weapons. And so while scientists, of course, have been developing technologies, the reality is scientists have also been leaders in trying to bring rationality to this discussion so that we never use nuclear weapons, because as we know, use of nuclear weapons would literally end the world as we know it.
One of our goals is certainly the reduction and eventual elimination of nuclear weapons. How can scientists contribute to that effort?
Well, in a number of ways. They, of course, recognize the destructive power of nuclear weapons, and so their expertise is necessary for people to understand that the use of nuclear weapons in a thermonuclear war would bring an end to human life as we know it. They obviously have to be on the front lines in terms of designing agreements so that we can make sure that there are proper verification provisions in place. If you have an agreement, you have to make sure that there's confidence that the agreement is being complied with, and that requires very technical expertise, and that kind of expertise can be brought to us by the scientific community.
At this point, as you alluded to already, the Trump administration has downplayed the role of science. I don't think they have a science advisor, and they seem to be rejecting science, let's say, on climate change. What kind of effect do you think this will have on our national security?
Well, it's going to have a very negative impact. mentioned climate change. If you look at the military leadership, they have all, indicated that climate change is going to be a major issue as it relates to our national security. Obviously, we can see the impacts here in the United States. I mean, I was out at the Naval Academy last year, and you had the head of the Naval Academy talking about how sea level rise was actually causing flooding in Annapolis and right near their facility. That's obviously a very localized example, but as the Director of National Intelligence pointed out in a report last year, the impact of climate change around the world will result in all sorts of dislocations and disruptions that will have an impact on our national security and, of course, on global security. So it's interesting when you've got military leaders, including, I should say, the current Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, who have indicated that climate change is real, being part of an administration that literally wants to put its head in the sand and deny the science. And, by eliminating the budget for earth science and climate change, it's easier, I guess, to ignore the problem when you eliminate the evidence for the problem, then easier to say, hey, it's not there.
Well, thank you for participating. Do you have any last message on the question of science and the importance of it in the United States life?
Well, people talk about science and they sometimes, I think, focus very narrowly on, what happens in a particular laboratory. But if you widen the lens a little bit, you recognize that the whole search for the truth, which is, of course, what science is about at the end of the day, search for the truth with respect to the physical world and the empirical process, it's based on the idea that we can advance, human knowledge. And if you want to put your head in the sand, you end up with a know-nothing policy, which can be very dangerous for the country. It will mean less economic development for the nation and weakened national security.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.